Welcome to Orange Coast Unitarian Universalist Church on Zoom. My name is Jan Mabey, and I am your worship associate today. Beth Syverson, our Director of Music Ministries, is out on sabbatical. Karen Magoon Pearson is our Director of Religious Education. Our minister, Reverend Sean Wilshire, is not leading the service today, but she has a special message for you.
Hello, Roomers and Zoomers. So I'm away this week, but my spirit is with you. For those of you who are new to the church, maybe you're just checking us out or curious about Unitarian Universalism, welcome. Glad you're here. You are in for a treat. This is a wonderful, friendly, fabulous, just all around spectacular community. I hope you can get to know them because it can be kind of tough to get to know a new community. But here's the thing, just hang in there, join in one of the activities, and before long, you'll get to know people, and then this becomes your church. Well, today we planned a wonderful service for you, just blending music and word to bring together a helpful and hope-filled message. We hope it will feed your soul. So without further ado, let's go.
We would like to recognize the many volunteers that have helped to put this service together today. In addition, this morning we are delighted to have the Reverend Dr. Tom Owen-Towle. Reverend Dr. Tom was ordained in 1967 and is still preaching hither and yon throughout our Pacific Southwest district. When the pandemic is over, Reverend Tom will re-engage his community commitments, volunteering at the homeless center, singing in nursing homes, and mentoring young people. His latest book will be published this spring, Making Peace with Our Own Death. Tom is delighted, as always, to be returning to Orange Coast, even if it's via Zoom. We respectfully recognize that our church property rests on a Hachiman and Tongva land. I would like to invite you to open the chat box and say hello this morning. As Unitarian Universalists, we have many different beliefs, but we are one loving community. We are bound together not by a common set of rules or beliefs, but rather a covenant. A covenant is simply a promise that whatever our beliefs, we accept one another and encourage each other in spiritual growth. We affirm that all life has inherent value and that all existence is interconnected. We strive for justice and compassion in our deeds and relationships, and we are committed to creating a welcoming community without regard to the traits that sometimes divide people. I want to extend a special welcome to visitors. If you are seeking a spiritual home, we hope that you will find it here. After the service, we will be placing everyone who remains into Zoom breakout rooms for 20 minutes of coffee and conversation. Everyone is welcome to join in, and it's a great way to get to know people in the congregation. Our worship begins with the lighting of our chalice, the symbol of the Unitarian Universalist tradition, and as we light it, we say our unison affirmation. If you have a chalice or a candle at home, we can light them together. Please join me now as we begin. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. To dwell together in peace, to seek truth in love, and to help one another, this we affirm together. Please join in singing our opening song, Lift Every Voice and Sing. This song is often referred to as the Black National Anthem and was originally written as a poem in 1900 by James Weldon Johnson and later set to music in 1905 by his brother, J. Rosamond Johnson. When we sing this, we are standing with Black people and against racism.
the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities of your existence. The bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. But today, well lived, makes every yesterday a dream of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day.
No one knows the exact origins of the song We Shall Overcome, but it might have been born in the 19th century, during the time of slavery in the United States. Its opening and closing lines are reminiscent of an old African American spiritual, No More Auction Block for Me. Imagine enslaved people working in the fields singing something like this simple refrain. No more auction block for me. No more, no more, no more auction block for me. Many thousand gone. In 1901, an African American Methodist minister named Charles Albert Tindley published I'll Overcome Someday, a hymn about spiritual warfare, not civil rights. The world is one great battlefield with forces all arrayed. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. I'll overcome someday. If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday. In the late 1940s, Lucille Simmons led several hundred black women who were courageously picketing the tobacco plant where they worked. They were trying to raise their hourly wage to 65 cents. Lucille began singing this song, slowly and freely, encouraging her sisters to fight to overcome their oppression. We will win our rights. We will win our rights. We will win our rights someday. Zilphia Horton, a teacher at Tennessee's Highlander Folk School, learned the chant from the striking cigar factory workers, and she passed it along to Pete Seeger, who published it in 1947. He changed the word will to shall, perhaps because shall has a more open vowel, and he added more verses. Seeger's folk music colleagues, Guy Carawan and Frank Hamilton, changed the rhythm to a slow 12/8 tempo. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. In 1957, deputies broke into a classroom at Highlander Folk School, where they were teaching union and civil rights training. They cut the power and forced the students to lie in the dark as they smashed up the classrooms looking for communist literature. The trembling students on the floor began singing, "We shall overcome. We shall overcome." One of the students was a 13-year-old girl named Jamila Jones. In order to control her fear, she made up a new verse to the song, which the students sang for 2 hours until the men left their school and left them alone. We are not afraid today. In the 1960s, a young black quartet called the Freedom Singers carried the tune and the hopeful words with them as they traveled around the United States, singing for peace and freedom.
We shall overcome.
I know
We shall overcome.
I know
We shall overcome someday.
Black college students sang as they were hauled away from whites-only lunch counters and thrown into police wagons.
We shall overcome.
In 1963, mourners sang the song as four little girls were pulled from the wreckage of their Sunday school room after a bomb went off at their church in Birmingham.
Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
In a huge rally in Washington, D.C. on August 28, 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, calling for the end of racism. At that event, Joan Baez led 250,000 of Dr. King's supporters in song.
We are not afraid to die.
And on April 9, 1968, in Atlanta, Georgia, a massive crowd of black people and white people linked their arms and sang, "We shall overcome," while marching behind Dr. Martin Luther King's funeral procession.
Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
And today, a century since its birth, "We Shall Overcome" is still being sung. It brings people together, it stirs people to action, and it provides strength to continue fighting for the rights of the oppressed everywhere. The song's even made its way around the world. It's been belted out by striking coal miners in Great Britain, by apartheid opponents in South Africa, and by student protesters in China's Tiananmen Square. And just in the last few years, it was sung at a Baltimore vigil for a transgender woman who was brutally beaten. Children of immigrants sang "We Shall Overcome" at a Capital Dream Act rally. And it was sung countless times at Black Lives Matter protests in the summer of 2020. Now please join us as we sing together "We Shall Overcome" to remember and honor all of those who have sung this song before us.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
Let us join together in reading the Network of Mutuality Responsive Reading composed by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted.
Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that.
We must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation.
The foundation of such a method is love.
Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds, which precipitate and perpetuate war.
One day, we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal.
We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means.
We shall hew out of the mountains of despair a stone of hope.
And now let us join together in some moments of prayer and silent meditation. O Spirit of life and love and liberation, our prayer is simple. Be our companion as we endure these times of conflict and crisis, internationally, global, medical, racial, social. We need comfort. And we also need to be challenged to create a universe of ever increasing justice and joy. And may there be in our lives peace and unrest and peace, sufficiently in calm, but sufficient unrest to keep us morally awake and spiritually on our toes. And now let us join together moments of silence. Blessed be I want to thank everybody for inviting me, the Reverend Sean, and your whole, even if it's via Zoom, we're always together at least once or twice a year in Orange Coast, and I'll be back. In my 80th year, I'm still going strong. Back in 1965, Martin Luther King sent forth a clarion call, literally, to put your body where the trouble is. And my hand slowly rose, and I cautiously boarded the bus from San Francisco to Selma, my first ever foray into the South. I mean, I was a bookish and pious seminary greenhorn, 23 years old, unformed in the rigors of justice building, let alone a communist-inspired anarchist, to use Governor George Wallace's damning phrase. And in retrospect, I probably went because of two spiritual sparks. WWJD, what would Jesus do? reinforced by WWMS, What Would Mother Say? You see, my decision seemed in alignment with both the Nazarene and my moral activist mom, who years later remarked, Tommy, I've never been prouder of you than when you showed up in Selma. But today is about Martin Luther King Jr., not Tommy Owen-Towle. So I want to share some fresh and challenging reminders about King's life, which will hopefully assist us with the fierce and daunting, perhaps apocalyptic moral struggles our American democracy faces right here, right now. 93 years ago, one of the moral giants of the 20th century, Martin Luther King Jr., entered the world on a cold and cloudy January 15th, so quietly that the doctor feared him stillborn and had to spank the baby several times before Martin cried. Born into a middle-class Georgia family, already active for 2 generations in the civil rights cause, King's father was pastor of Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church. Baptized Michael Luther King, his name was changed to Martin Luther at the age of 5 to honor the Reformation rebel who nailed his independent declarations to the castle church. Martin Luther was an extremely sensitive boy, and it hurt him deeply when whipped upon occasion by his stern father, whom he loved so much. Martin was the most peculiar child because whenever you whipped him, Daddy King remarked, he'd stand there and the tears would run down, yet he'd never cry. As a child, King had his share of fights, excelling in what an associate termed middle class combat, never using stones or knives. In all, you see, young King was a bit of a hellion and subject to violent mood swings. And of course, there were the stabbing cruelties of bigotry, leaving deep scars despite King's protected family life. In the 11th grade, King entered an oratorical contest sponsored by the Negro Elks in a distant Georgia town. In speaking on the Negro and the Constitution, King captured a prize with the force of his presentation. And that night, heading back to Atlanta on a crowded bus, King and his teacher reviewed the exciting events of the day. The bus stopped and some whites got on. There were no empty seats. And the white driver came back and ordered King and the teacher to surrender their seats. But Martin Luther refused to budge. And the driver threatened him, calling King a black SOB, until at last Martin heeded his teacher's whispers and reluctantly got up. They stood in the aisle all the way home, jostled and thrown about as the bus sped down the highway. That night will never leave my mind, King said later. It was the angriest I've ever been in my life. My, how little Martin loved language. You just wait and see, he once told his parents. When I grow up, I'm going to get me some big words. This lad, of course, turned into one of the most powerful speech makers in American history. And Martin's recall was phenomenal. By age 5, he could recite whole biblical passages and sing entire hymns from memory. His parents and grandmother praised him for his precocious ways, making him flush with self-esteem. Is it any wonder that he zipped through high school, entering Morehouse College at 15, pondering a career and searching for some intellectual basis for a social philosophy? King was persuaded by Unitarian Henry David Thoreau's argument that the creative minority, even of one honest person, could set in motion a moral revolution. He was also exposed to the writings of Gandhi, whose mystic faith in nonviolent protest became King's lodestar. We shouldn't forget that at 17, Martin finally made suitable peace with his family's Baptist church by calculating that he would become a rational minister whose sermons would be both spiritually and intellectually stimulating, a respectable force for social protest. He was elected class president of Crozier Theological Seminary and moved on to get a doctorate from Boston University, as well as a bride, Coretta Scott, a bright and earnest music student who graduated from Antioch College. Few figures in human history have been more able than King to translate reflective study into compassionate action through the urgencies of his time. Nonetheless, Martin was brought into history largely by accident. For his initial dream was to become a professor, an academic. In 1954, he took a pastorate in Montgomery, Alabama. And there in 1955, you'll remember a seamstress, tired feet, precipitated the first great civil rights test of power and launched King's meteoric career. Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her seat on a town bus to a white man ended 382 days later with capitulation of the Montgomery bus line to a comprehensive Afro-American consortium, as well as the U.S. Supreme Court. King, too new to Montgomery to have enemies in the usually fragmented Black community, became its leader, and his march to martyrdom had begun. To be sure, this arrest was the precipitating factor in the protest, but not the cause. No, it was really the story of 50,000 folks who had grown increasingly fed up with oppression and who were willing to substitute tired feet for tired souls. As King went on to say, our campaign is not against individuals, never has been, never will be, but against the forces of evil in the world. The basic tension here is not between Negroes and whites, but between justice and injustice. And if there's a victory, it will be a victory not merely for 50,000 Negroes, but a victory for justice and the forces of light. In reviewing King's life, we must remember all the protests, the marches, the jailings that he and his compadres endured, so grueling yet so empowering, as the indomitable human spirit dared to shatter the chains of injustice. And in 1963, after the March on Washington, we can still hear, can we not, the haunting refrains of his extraordinary "I Have a Dream" speech. You know, he had started that speech that day, and he was kind of wandering. He wasn't core. He wasn't getting to the message. And Mahalia Jackson was seated next to him, and she said, "Martin, tell him about the dream. Tell him about the dream." And so he did. I still have a dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed, that all persons are created equal. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. King's relentless struggle for freedom and justice continued to elicit white resistance and retaliation, jealousies among Black leaders, and produce a troubled soul in King. He was a harried man, holding an almost insupportable tension, the exertion of high spirituality alternating with moments of sensual release. He was an oft-tormented and flawed person. King made mistakes. He wasn't a wonderful administrator. He didn't abstain from whiskey or tobacco. He wasn't a fabulous husband or father. He committed adultery. He wasn't a god. King was well aware of his shortcomings and confided to friends that I'm deeply conscious of 2 Martin Luther Kings. And the great burden of life is always to try to keep my higher self in command. He was also guilt-ridden because he didn't feel he deserved all the accolades he got. He was raised in material comfort and given a superior education. He never really suffered like the Black masses who loved him so. There were other reasons for King's troubled soul. He felt a great deal of anger for the evils he'd witnessed in Dixie, especially the murder of the 4 Birmingham girls. And he relied more than ever on creative nonviolence to funnel his fury into constructive channels. He never told his people not to be angry, as many of his Black critics charged. It was anger, after all, that fueled resistance. But ours must not be a hateful anger, he said, for that would only prove ruinous. Anger for impact, never for injury. It must be a disciplined, nonviolent rage, what King called a creative maladjustment, a creative dissatisfaction. It's still my basic article of faith, he said, that social justice can be achieved in democracy advanced only to the degree that there's a firm adherence to nonviolent action and resistance. However, and don't forget this, however, as much as I deplore violence, there's one evil worse than violence, King said, and that's cowardice. That's cowardice. Then, of course, there was J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI relentlessly stalking King, trying to destroy him by wiretapping and ruthlessly defaming his character. A lesser person than King might have quit in shame, leaving Hoover and his deputies to gloat in righteous triumph. But King's determination to go on was a fierce countervailing force. He resolved never to be bullied into cringing in action. He refused to be a coward. So whatever his imperfections as a person, King found comfort in the conviction that the struggle itself was right. In his effort to do God's will, King could lose himself and prepare to lay down his life. He said the quality, not the longevity of one's life is what's important. If you're cut down in a movement that's designed to save the soul of a nation, then no other death could be more redemptive. Most of all, I want to remind us today that King was an inconvenient hero. For those among us who would seek a non-abrasive idol, an icon, whose recorded speeches can be used as inspirational resources for rocking our memories to sleep, MLK is the wrong guy. We Americans, oh, we can develop national amnesia quite rapidly, can't we? 54 years after his murder, it's so tempting to forget or ignore his demands for a fundamental restructuring of American society, fundamental restructuring of American society. His was not a sentimental vision, it was a radical one. And we must engage the tougher, more difficult, inconvenient king if we're going to progress in 2022 with moral courage. As with Malcolm X, King in his last years was willing to take huge risks on behalf of hope, to shake himself free of more familiar settings and bravely respond to the cries of the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized women and men and children of our nation and the entire world. So if we're going to honor King's memory, we can do no less. And frankly, at this precarious juncture in our American history, we desperately need unpurchasable and inconvenient heroes and heroines who intrepidly pioneer the moral path. And so the last 5 years of King's life, and remember, he died at the age of 38. He didn't reach midlife. The last 5 years of King's life were concerned with the growing reality of economic injustice in America and the rehumanizing of our cities. King had always demanded that moral people are those who make genuine sacrifices and stand unwaveringly for justice, but his horizons were expanded and his commitment increased. He kept warning fellow Americans about the triple evils of racism, militarism, and materialism. He took a radical stand on Vietnam when he was advised by both his black and white cohorts, "Be silent, Martin, stick to race relations." Instead, he replied, "Well, it's worthless to talk about integration if there's no world to integrate." The bombs in Vietnam exploded home, and they destroyed the hopes and possibilities for a decent America. In a prophetic way, King pointed out, in the years ahead, those concerned with issues of peace and justice must be concerned with Guatemala and Thailand and Mozambique and South Africa. Those concerned with getting on the right side of the world revolution must undergo a radical revolution of expansive values. He kept upping the moral ante, yet he assumed a radical stance without ever writing our country off, without ever screaming at whites, without ever waving a Viet Cong flag. King was nonviolent to the end. Indeed, at the close of his life, he was killed in Memphis, Tennessee, while peacefully protesting with garbage workers in support of their cause. And my friends, don't forget that at the time that King was shot dead, 72% of Americans disapproved of him. And 55% of Black Americans disapproved of him. King was isolated. He was alienated. He was wrestling with despair. He was smoking and drinking constantly, womanizing regularly as ways to garner relief from the deep anxiety of living under the constant threat of death and all the vicious attacks on his character by Black and non-Black writers and politicians alike. Martin Luther King Jr. was down and out. And so if we're to properly celebrate King's birthday every year, we must make sure that his message not be caged, but instead be seen as morally uncomfortable even somewhat subversive. We can't let an annual holiday make Martin Luther King Jr. a mascot or allow his revolutionary image to be whitewashed American style. Now, without a doubt, it's tricky to immortalize a reformer. So our challenge is to preserve King's heritage without losing his troubling dream, his inconvenient message. We need the 4th of July to celebrate the strengths of America, but we need times of self-criticism like King's birthday to goad our society to change toward ever broader justice and liberty. We can't simply label our land the home of the free and hole up in smug complacency. There's a wonderful remark that fellow Unitarian Kurt Vonnegut made in one of his novels, which reminds us that the Star-Spangled Banner is the only national anthem in the world that ends with a question. Oh, say, does that Star-Spangled Banner yet wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave? Incredibly, our national anthem closes not with a fixed declaration, but with an open-ended question. Think of that. And so whenever we sing the Star-Spangled Banner, may we always remember that it bespeaks the dream of someone who knows that genuine freedom for everyone has not yet come, who knows that we must keep on, keeping on to become the land of liberty and justice for all that we profess to be. For a great country, let's just stick with being a good and honest country. Not only celebrates its triumphs, but also remembers and reckons with its sins and keeps plotting and working to be freer, more compassionate to each and every one of its citizens. And so the issue hovers. Is King safely dead? Or if King's radical message remains vigorously alive, you and I must seriously ask what his message truly demands of us right here and now. There's a beautiful essay by Vincent Harding entitled "Tell the Children," wherein he instructs parents, all of us, just how to narrate the memory of King. Tell the children that the tougher, more difficult King lives. Let them know that we can see Martin's face confronting the tanks in Tiananmen Square, dancing on the crumbling wall of Berlin, singing in Prague, alive in the glistening eyes of Nelson Mandela, present in the lives of freedom fighters and justice builders the world over today. We need to let our children experience the great humanizing qualities of King's hope. Teach them to recognize the hero or heroine in themselves. Teach them to nurture the compassionate and the forgiving in us all. Tell them that King lives within us, right here, wherever his message is expanded and carried out in our daily lives, wherever his unfinished battles are taken up by our hands. Indeed, whenever justice and righteousness prevail in our homes, in our houses of worship, in our own American society, and in the larger world itself, King lives. King lives. King lives.
Love will guide us, peace has tried us, all
Unitarian Universalist congregations are fully self-supporting, meaning that members and friends raise all funds for the operating budget, ministries, and programs of the church. We are ever grateful for your gifts of time, treasure, and talent. OCUUC amplifies that spirit of generosity by sharing half of the plate we receive with an organization that shares our values. This month, we are supporting Stand Up for Kids OC. In 2021, with the COVID restrictions, Stand Up for Kids was still able to help 460 youth. And with over 5,000 touch points, they provided over 4,500 meals and helped with over 1,500 nights of shelter. Just a glimpse of what your help has been doing for our youth. Please continue to give and find out more about Stand Up for Kids at standupforkids.org. There are multiple ways in which you can support the church and this organization. You can mail a check, you can go through our website, or you can use an app called Vanco Mobile. The choice is yours. All the information is on our website should you need it. As always, thank you for your generosity. Our offertory musical selection, Lily in the Valley, features Lonnie Norwood Jr., who performed Trouble Don't Last Always earlier during a prelude. Lonnie collaborates frequently as a clinician and singer with the international ensemble Village Harmony.
Well, there's a lily in the valley, bright as the morning star. Help me sing it. Lily in the valley, yeah. Bright as the morning star. Lily in the valley, bright as the morning star. Joy in the valley, bright as the morning star. Help me sing it. Joy in the valley, bright as the morning star. Joy in the valley, bright as the morning star. Somebody found love in the valley, just as bright as the morning star. Said I'm talking about love in the valley, bright as the morning star. Love in the valley, bright as the morning star. My soul need peace in the valley, just as bright as the morning star. Oh, peace in the valley, bright as the morning star. Peace in the valley, bright as the morning star.
Please join in singing We Gather Together, a song that puts our intentions into words and expresses our gratitude for the many gifts we share.
We gather together, we gather as one, for peace, love, and justice for everyone. We give from our hearts to show that we care. We can change lives with what we share.
Now is a time when we honor the important events of our lives. You are invited, one and all, whether you're a member, a friend, or a visitor, to participate in our weekly ritual of joys and sorrows. So, let's take a deep breath. Perhaps you come here today holding something close to your heart, moments from the last days or hours that have struck you at your core. If you'd like to honor such a profound joy or sorrow, you are invited to do so. We do this by lighting candles, and you can light one at home if you have one. It's a wonderful way to honor what you hold in your heart. I'll light a candle in just a moment for all of us. If you'd like to share your joy or sorrow with the congregation, you can write it in the chat. Let's take a few moments in contemplation as we listen to some music, and then I will begin reading joys and sorrows out loud. Please forgive me if I miss a joy or sorrow, but you can help me not to miss one by waiting to type any comments to an express joy or sorrow until we are finished. Thank you. Amelia R.N. has a joy. Aaron's 71st birthday. He is officially in the 70s. I feel blessed to have him. Let me light this candle here. Barbara S. The 17th is my birthday, and I'm in San Diego with my sister this weekend. On Thursday, I will be having a robot-assisted laparoscopy, outpatient hysterectomy. I will be recuperating at my sister-in-law's. Good luck with that, Barbara. We hope all goes well. Donna M. has a joy. My granddaughters were with me for a sleepover last night. What a blessing. Ashley VH, please pray for me and my family. We are all COVID-19 positive. We're so sorry, Ashley. Hoping you all feel better soon. Let us hold in love all the joys and celebrations and all the hurts and sadness, both spoken and silent. Let our joys remind us to be thankful, our concerns remind us to hope, and our sorrows remind us to connect. Let all these moments remind us that we are not alone. Let us join together as we extinguish the flame of our chalice and say together, we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are a congregation made up of people who all believe differently, and yet when we are together, we make up one loving community. We need not think alike to love alike. If you're a guest, a visitor, or someone who hasn't yet been known to us, I invite you to become a part of this beloved community. We encourage you to write in the chat your name and where you are from so we can welcome you. If you'd like to know more about our church, including programming for our youth and children, please contact us at hello@ocuuc.org and we will help you get connected. In addition, we invite you to sign up for our weekly email called The Blast at blast@ocuuc.org. We want everyone to feel a part of this beloved community, so please reach out and we will help you get connected. After the benediction, we will have a short period where everyone can wave and say hello. After that, you can choose to be put into Zoom breakout groups for 20 minutes or so. We invite you to check in and get to know the people in your group and welcome any visitors. So we have our weekly announcements here. One thing is our choir rehearsal is this coming Thursday at 8 p.m. and the choir is inviting anybody from the congregation to join. Remember, you're going to be muted, so you'll have a great time. Okay.
Our benediction comes to us from words by the Unitarian minister and abolitionist Theodore Parker, 1810 to 1860. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space, its shrine, the good heart, its creed, all truth, its ritual, works of love, its profession of faith, divine living.
Please join Beth in singing Be Safe, Be Well.
Be safe, be well, you mean the world to me. Be safe, be well, you mean the world to me. Be safe, be well, you mean the world to me. Be safe, be well, you mean the world to me.
If you are staying for the breakout rooms and have any questions for Reverend Dr. Tom, please leave the breakout room and return to the main room to talk to him. He's there to answer any questions. This service is over. Let our service continue.